once again for making time to join us in our webinar today. We are so glad to have you here, and we have on the lineup a very interesting discussion and information that is going to be disseminated here today. Today we are on climate resilience, and I'm gonna just show a little bit of what we have today. I'm gonna give a small introduction, and then I'm going to give it over to my colleagues. So we're going to be getting presentations about digital agriculture solutions for climate resilient smallholder agriculture. Before that, I'm going to just provide some little bit of context into the whole of this webinar series. And then before that, I'll do a small welcome note, and then I will introduce our speakers today. So again, yeah, so just move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So I welcome you again to this session, and it's on digital agriculture solutions for climate resilient smallholder agriculture. So this session is organized in collaboration with GSMA and CRAG VC. So CRAG VC in full is Climate Resilient Agriculture Virtual Club. And this webinar series highlights various things around building resilience of smallholder farmers in against climate change. And I'm just going to give you a small brief introduction about the climate resilience agriculture and our perspectives to it, that we get into the discussion today. So we understand that climate resilient agriculture is an approach that recognizes the challenges posed by the changing climate and aims to enhance agricultural systems, adaptability, and sustainability. So in the face of the rising temperatures, extreme weather events, and shifting precipitation patterns, it is very crucial to implement strategies that mitigate risks and ensure food security. So climate resilient agriculture encompasses a range of practices, including crop diversification, improved water management, soil conservation, and the other use of climate smart technology. So by leveraging technology, for instance, we can build very resilient systems that are better equipped to withstand climate shock and support the livelihoods of farmers. Throughout this webinar, we will explore some of the technologies that have shown great promise in contributing to strengthening the resilience of smallholder farmers. So our partners today, GSMA, have done some investments and have done some research, and today they have very great insights that would like to share with us, also engage us in discussions. So if you'd like to engage with us on the social media, we are working with 2 hashtags. So you can either use CRAG VC and GSMA M4D as a hashtag. All posts that are posted through these hashtags, we will be able to interact with them effectively and even discuss after this 1 hour that we have dedicated to this meeting. So as some little ground rules, when you join this meeting or this webinar, we have all your mics turned off by default so that we minimize chances of disruptions. Please keep them muted unless you have to ask a question, which we will call you to do. We welcome contributions when we will open the Q&A session. We can also continue interacting through the chat. Just post your thoughts and any questions that you may have, and we will be able to respond to them during the Q&A sessions. As I mentioned before, continue interacting with us through our social media handles. Today, we are joined, or we have 2 experts who are going to take us through some very interesting, findings around climate, technologies for building climate resilience. We are joined by Jean Crib, who is a Senior Insights Manager at GSMA Agritech, based in London, UK. Jean is an established digital agriculture researcher He has extensive experience managing research and implementation projects across Sub-Saharan Africa and Asia, focused on catalyzing socioeconomic impact through digital technology. At GSMA, Jean leads agri-tech work on climate focused on leveraging digital agriculture solutions to build the climate resilience of smallholder agriculture systems. He does this by publishing thought leadership, innovative solutions, and best practices and managing research and development projects on the use of mobile network to drive innovation in climate services. We are also joined by Lisa. Lisa Chasin has extensive experience leading research and advisory projects centered on catalyzing digital innovations that drive financial inclusion and enhance agri-food systems in Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. Her expertise spans multiple thematic areas, including inclusive and digital financial services, gender, and agri-tech. As an insights manager for the GSM Agri-Tech program, she drives industry research and intelligence projects to uncover opportunities in digital agriculture. A qualitative and human-centered research expert, she brings an understanding of how to design value propositions and business models to best serve smallholder farmers, especially women farmers. We're excited to have them. Yeah, so we are going to go straight into the session where we have presentations from our GSMA team, and we are going to have two presentations from Jean-Pierre and Lisa Chasin. So at this point, I'm going to leave it to my colleagues to take it up with the presentation, and then I'm going to come back when we start the Q&A sessions. As I mentioned, please feel free to interact with us through the chat, post your comments, post your questions here and also on the social media. Welcome, Lisa and Jean. We are happy to have you today.
Thanks so much, Willis. Thanks for the introduction. And of course, thanks for the opportunity to present our work in this great forum. It's great to see lots of people online. And today we'll be presenting our learnings on how digital solutions can drive climate resilience within smallholder agriculture systems. Just before we start, I'd like to acknowledge our donors. This material has been funded by UK Aid from the UK's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, and is supported by the GSMA and its members. So just a quick agenda again. I'll start with a short introduction to who we are, and I'll go through a couple of slides just to set the context for today's session. I'll then go on to present some of our R&D activities, where we develop technologies and understand how mobile networks can provide high-resolution weather observations and thereby enable innovation in weather and climate services. My colleague Lisa will then take over to introduce the recent GSMA Innovation Fund on the digitization of agricultural value chains, and she'll outline some of the key findings regarding the impact of climate resilience solutions that were implemented there. So just to start, I'd like to spend a few minutes introducing GSMA Agri-Tech. So we're part of the GSMA, which is the Global Trade Association of the mobile industry. And we have over 750 members who are mobile operators and another 400 companies in the broader mobile ecosystem. Within the GSMA, there's a not-for-profit unit called Mobile for Development, which is positioned at the intersection of the mobile ecosystem and the development sector. And its goal is to stimulate digital innovation and deliver both sustainable business and large-scale socio-economic impact for the underserved. And the work that is done at Mobile for Development is supported by donors. So our program within M4D is the Agri-Tech program. The vision of the program is to achieve equitable and sustainable food chains that empower farmers and strengthen local economies. And we do this by bringing together and supporting the mobile industry, agribusinesses, innovators, and investors in the agri-tech space to launch, improve, and scale impactful and commercially viable digital solutions for farmers in the developing world. And we do this through our research and insights work, where we inform the international development community on the operational and business models that have the highest potential for impact. And we also run innovation funds and provide technical assistance. And by providing funding and deep technical expertise, we can support scalable, commercially viable digital solutions that impact smallholder farmers and the agricultural industry. So let me go to some slides in order to set some context. So as Willis already mentioned, climate change is affecting food production in a number of ways through rising temperatures, changing precipitation patterns, and greater frequency of extreme weather events. And as you can see from this map, a number of climate risks will challenge societies around the world, with tropical areas facing risks of flooding or wildfires and arid areas becoming hotter and drier. Now, smallholder farmers are responsible for the food security of about 2 billion people around the world, and they are severely impacted by climate hazards due to their reliance on rain-fed agriculture and fragile ecosystems that are becoming increasingly disrupted. So in order to maintain food security and improve rural livelihoods in the face of a changing climate, food systems must adapt to manage and mitigate these increasing challenges. So mobile and digital ecosystems have evolved rapidly over the past decade or so and provide the building blocks for innovation in digital agriculture services across low and middle income countries. So mobile services have really driven the evolution and the scale of digital agricultural services and remain key to reaching marginalized groups and are enabling some of the more advanced app and web-based services. Mobile payment services are becoming increasingly available, with 1.6 billion mobile money accounts registered globally last year. And these services are key to enabling scalable business models such as pay-as-you-go, as well as driving financial inclusion of previously unbanked groups. And frontier technologies such as artificial intelligence and Internet of Things, combined with data assets, are increasingly being leveraged to open up new use cases in digital agriculture, such as smart farming, data-driven agriculture advisory, traceability, and carbon finance, that all have the potential to also achieve great impact. So what is climate resilience and how can digital agriculture services drive resilience? In short, it's the capacity to cope with a hazardous trend or event. And in this case, it's the impacts of climate change, of course. So we've mapped here at a very high level how digital agriculture services can feed into building this much needed resilience. So digital advisory and financial services can have a broad impact. They can enable the adoption of climate smart practices through the provision of contextualized advisory, and also by providing the credit and loans that are required to sometimes adopt these practices, thereby driving mitigation and adaptation. Digital advisory can also enable responses to climate hazards through services such as early warnings, and financial services can aid in the recovery from climate shocks through services such as weather index insurance. And market linkages are important to provide access to climate smart inputs, as well as connecting to output markets that reward sustainable practices, thus enabling and incentivizing adaptation practices. Similarly, smart farming solutions enable production practices that maximize and adapt to the prevailing agroclimatic conditions. So just to contextualize the rest of the session a bit more, at GSMA Agritech, we work on these digital agriculture solutions at various stages of the service development, all the way from research and development to commercial sustainability and scale. And the work I will be presenting shortly on the use of mobile networks for rainfall observation lies firmly within the earlier stages, as it's focused on developing and validating technological innovations on the use of mobile network data for rainfall observation, and exploring how services may utilize this new data source. The work of the Innovation Fund, on the other hand, is looking at more mature services, and as it supports the launch, iteration, and scale up of digital services with mobile operators and agri-tech startups. And Lisa will be covering that during the second part of the presentation. And we recently published our learnings from both of these work streams, and you can find the reports online on the GSMA Agritech website. So now moving on, I'll talk through how mobile networks and specifically CML data can enable innovation in weather and climate services. So existing mobile networks can be used to observe rainfall at high resolution and at near real time. So to start with, I'd like to outline the principles behind this application. Data within a mobile network is distributed by the backhaul network, which is made up of cabled and wireless links. These links connect individual towers to one another and the network core. These wireless links are called commercial microwave links, as they use microwave radio signals to transmit data. And when it rains between two towers that are connected by CML, The raindrops scatter and absorb the radio signal, which leads to loss of signal strength at the receiving tower. By comparing the amount of signal lost during dry and wet periods, specialized algorithms can calculate rainfall intensity along the link path. Using this approach, each CML in a backhaul network can be used to provide an observation of rainfall. These observations are then interpolated to generate gridded maps of rainfall, typically at a 1 to 3 kilometer grid size. And for this approach to be effective, mobile networks must satisfy a number of criteria or guidelines. So the majority of links should be shorter than 10 kilometers because if they're any longer, the distance covered is too large to generate an accurate point estimate. Similarly, the transmission frequency used by the link should be higher than 10 gigahertz, as lower frequencies are less sensitive to rainfall. And depending on how data is checked by the algorithm, several links may be needed in a given area in order to triangulate data. And just as a rule of thumb, when data is interpolated, each data point is created up to 30 kilometers from the center of the link as a rough guide. But how much area each point covers is determined by the local climate more than anything else. So GSMA Agritech has been working with mobile operators and technical partners across 3 markets to apply and test these principles in low and middle income countries. So on the slides, you can see the markets we've been working in. And for each, we're showing the CML network of the mobile operator we're working with and the weather stations that were available for the study. And the objectives of the studies were to access CML data from the mobile networks, make it available for rainfall observation, convert the CML data into rainfall data, and compare this to reference data sources, such as weather stations and satellite data, in order to validate and optimize the algorithms used for rainfall observation. And also, we identified potential use cases that would maximize the value add from CML rainfall observations. And actually in Sri Lanka, we went one step further and developed an online service that provides CML rainfall observations in near real time through a web map and API. And these studies that we've conducted have yielded the most extensive sets of CML and reference data collected in low and middle income countries to date. And you can find the learnings from these studies in peer-reviewed articles and are covered in the recent report that I've mentioned. So the use of CML data can greatly increase the amount of rainfall observations available in low and middle income countries, where weather radar is generally not available. So the density of weather stations in low middle income countries is well below the minimum amount recommended by the World Met Organization. In sub-Saharan Africa, it's about 8 times lower. In comparison, mobile network and by extension CML networks are closely correlated to population density, as you can see on the map on the left, and have expanded quite rapidly to cover about 94% of the general population and 88% of the rural population in low middle income countries. And since each CML in the network can be used to observe rainfall over its path, the number of CMLs available for rainfall observation is exponentially higher than the accessed weather stations. So just to give you an example, in Sri Lanka, we were only able to access data from about 32 automated weather stations through the Met Office. Yet we had access to about 2,500 CMLs through Dialog Axiata's network. So where CML data can greatly improve coverage compared to automated weather stations, it also presents a great increase to the resolution and reliability provided by satellite observations. So to illustrate what these differences in resolution look like in practice, you can see on this slide some animations of a rainfall event over Lagos as observed by satellite data from the GPM mission, and compare it to the same event observed through CML data. So at the top, you can see data from NASA's Global Precipitation Mission, which was captured on a 10-kilometer grid and refreshes every 30 minutes. And as you can see, it provides just kind of a coarse representation of rain passing over Lagos with very little detail. I'll now add in visuals of the same event using CML data. And CML data is typically interpolated on a grid of about 2 by 2 kilometers, and data is available at every 15 minutes or more often. So as you can see, the increased resolution allows you to much better see the borders of the event, how it moved across the city, and it can also allow you to identify those areas hit by the most intense rainfall. So this data is much more in line with the type of data that would typically be provided by weather radar, and we hope it will enable similar applications as radar does in high-income countries. So how accurate is CML data for rainfall observation? So there's a number of studies that have looked into this. In high-income countries, weather radar data is available and provides quite extensive data sets that can be used to validate CML observations. And what they found, and most of these studies have been conducted in the Netherlands and Germany, is that CML rainfall maps actually slightly outperform maps based on rain gauges. So that's a very good level of accuracy, and can significantly outperform satellite data. They've also shown that higher CML network densities are not necessary to provide accurate observations, but they can improve reliability. Studies in low and middle income countries are hampered by the limitations in ground level data. Exactly those limitations that the CML approach is trying to address. However, the results of GSMA supported studies, which used weather station data as a reference, yielded some very valuable insights. One is that across the 3 countries, results varied quite significantly. So Sri Lanka showed a high correlation of CML to weather station data, which indicates a high level of accuracy. In Nigeria, however, performance varied across climatic zones. So the wetter areas in the central and southern parts of the country yielded better results than the drier areas in the north. And this indicates to us that separate localized algorithms need to be developed for the different climatic zones in order to deal with these differences and kind of maximize accuracy of the approach across the country. In Papua New Guinea, we learned a lot about how network affects the potential for CML to observe rainfall. It's characterized, the network in PNG is characterized by long, low frequency links in all but the most urban areas, and this made CML rainfall observation very difficult. So what relevance does this have in terms of enabling digital agriculture services? So CML rainfall data can be used to create or improve weather and agriculture services, a variety that strengthen climate resilience. And we here have shortlisted a number of services for which CMLs can be the primary data source, and so would add the most value. Data-driven agriculture services draw on a variety of data sources, including weather data, to provide context-specific decision-making support to agricultural actors. Such services allow agricultural actors to better plan their activities and deal with weather-related risk. So in Nigeria, we were working with Hello Tractor to pilot the use of CML rainfall observations to predict demand and optimize logistics for its tractor services, which they have found is often driven by cumulative rainfall in the preceding days. Rainfall index insurance provides protection to farmers based on rainfall quantities, where payouts are triggered when rainfall amounts are above or below predetermined thresholds. So such services allow farmers to recover lost income or inputs during adverse weather conditions. In Sri Lanka, the insurer Sanasa provides rainfall index insurance to tea farmers and sees CML data as an enabler to expand the coverage of its services, as it currently relies on automated weather stations, either from the Met Office or situated with some of Dialog's network infrastructure. Rainfall nowcasting provides high-resolution rainfall forecasts up to 6 hours in advance and can be run on CML data alone or on a combination of CML and satellite data. And nowcast can be used to generate services for a variety of industries, such as heavy rainfall warnings for agriculture and evaluations of road safety for the transport sector. Flood early warnings use data from rainfall observations and water levels to identify areas that are at risk of flooding. And they've been shown to be very effective at preventing fatalities due to their efficiency and the relatively low cost of evacuating for a flash flood. And again, in Nigeria, TAMO, which is the Trans-African Hydromet Observatory, is working on integrating CML data into its flood early warning systems in order to reduce the cost of providing such services to small urban centers. So I hope my presentation has illustrated the strong opportunity for mobile network data to contribute to the development of digital climate resilient services. And please do drop any questions you have in the Q&A function of the Zoom call, and I'll be very happy to address those later on. So with that, I'll now hand over to my colleague Lisa, who will talk you through the next part of the presentation.
Thank you, Jan. Hi, everyone. My name is Lisa Chassin, and I'm an Insights Manager with the GSMA AgriTech program. So we've just seen with Jan how the GSMA AgriTech program is working to enable climate services through MNO data. And now I'm going to talk about how we are supporting the development and scaling of digital agriculture solutions. More specifically, I'm going to present the key insights and lessons from the GSMA Innovation Fund for the digitization of agricultural value chains, an initiative that supported grantee organizations in designing and testing and scaling commercially viable digital solutions that address smallholder farmers' challenges, including climate change. As with Jan's presentation, please feel free to drop any question you may have in the chat, and we'll address them at the end during the Q&A session. So before we start, and then we share the learning of our work, I want to show you a short introductory video about the Innovation Fund. So let's take a look. I don't have any sound, though.
Face decreased yields due to climate change. Smallholder farmers produce more than 30% of food globally, yet they remain financially excluded and face decreased yields due to climate change. The GSMA Innovation Fund for Digitization of Agricultural Value Chains is improving their livelihoods, financial inclusion, and climate resilience through digital innovation. The AgriTech program launched this innovation fund to provide grant funding and technical assistance to innovators. It helps innovators develop, test, and scale commercially viable digital solutions for smallholder farmers in low and middle-income countries. 6 organizations secured de-risking grants of up to £215,000.
Our mission is to digitize agribusinesses and transition farmers to sustainable production, traceable sourcing from farm to fork.
Over 500,000 farmers have adopted one or more services developed by the grantee.
I have received a lot of information from going through about tea growing. I get this information very often and on the whole cycle of tea growing. They advise me on how to prepare the land, how to plant the trees, how to prepare the beds.
With the support of the Innovation Fund, grantees are connecting farmers to a range of digital services.
Farmers had issues accessing loans. Through this agriculture digitization project, farmers are becoming more visible. Financial institutions can see that farmers earned that much in a particular period.
To support the grantees, the GSMA employed a range of technical assistance tools to achieve active and sustained use of the digital services. Farmers can now use digital services offered by Innovation Fund grantees to improve their incomes and better protect from extreme weather events. This benefits everyone.
The agriculture sector allows Vodacom to diversify its revenue beyond its core offerings and serve a new segment of the population while improving farmers' financial inclusion, incomes, and climate resilience using digital technologies.
The GSMA Innovation Fund for Digitization of Agricultural Value Chains leverages digital agriculture to improve the lives of smallholder farmers. Find out more at gsma.com/agritech.
Great. Thank you for showing the video. So let's now move on. Oh, yes, exactly. Thank you. Let's move on now to the high-level outcomes of the GSMA Innovation Fund. So I feel that it is important, first of all, to mention, to provide some context, that the Innovation Fund ran from June 2020 to December 2022. Among the organizations that we supported, 4 were mobile network operators: Dialog in Sri Lanka, Jazz in Pakistan, MTN in Rwanda, and Vodacom in Tanzania. And 2 were agri-tech companies, Agromol in Nigeria and Coltiva in Indonesia. Together, these organizations profiled more than 1.4 million farmers across 17 value chains, and the services they developed were used by more than 500,000 of these farmers. Although the video quickly introduced the services supporting during the Innovation Fund, I wanted to explain better what they are. So the first use case that was supported by the Innovation Fund was digital profiling and procurement, which refers to the digitization of farmer information and of transactions between farmers and agribusinesses. The second use case was digital payments from crop buyers to farmers for the sale of their harvest. We also help scale digital advisory services, which cover agricultural and livestock information, weather and climate advisory, as well as information on market prices. The Innovation Fund also supported the provision of lending products, loans, targeting smallholder farmers and addressing their specific agricultural needs. And finally, we supported insurance services to help farmers mitigate the risks of weather events. So of the 1.4 million farmers profiled by our Innovation Fund grantees, most are smallholder farmers who cultivate less than 2 hectares of land. And this is important as smallholder farmers face more challenges accessing climate-related tools and information than larger commercial farmers. So being digitally profiled can unlock access to these essential services for them. Another thing that I wanted to mention about the outcomes of the Innovation Fund is the gender gap among the pool of farmer profiled. As a matter of fact, women make up just 1/3 of all digitally profiled farmers. And this reflects, of course, the existing social norms within agriculture value chains, even before the digital services were introduced. Typically, male are heads of household and landowners, so they are the ones establishing the formal relationships with crop buyers. And in contrast, women traditionally engaged in activities like sowing, weeding, harvesting, which are essential activities, but they are less likely to interact with buyers through which these services are provided. So this results in women being underrepresented in the portfolio of services offered during the GSMA Innovation Fund. And because they have less access to the tools and resources that can help them adopt climate smart practices, they are left more vulnerable to the adverse effects of climate change. So now that we had the chance to give an overview of the Innovation Fund high-level outcomes, let's focus on the topic of this presentation, which is about how digitized agricultural value chains can contribute to the climate resilience of smallholder farmers. So during the Innovation Fund, we surveyed farmers to understand their perception of climate resilience. And what we found is that, yes, most farmers are concerned about the impact of weather and climate shocks on their livelihoods and on their farms. In fact, there are just 80% of farmers who do not feel concerned about changing weather patterns. And this means that working to strengthen farmers' climate resilience is highly relevant. However, Although farmers are aware of the direct impact of weather patterns on their yield and incomes, we also noticed a discrepancy between farmers being concerned about weather and taking steps to prepare for climate and weather-related events. So in reality, farmers often mention that the weather and climate events are beyond their control and that there's not much they could do to counteract climate change. And basically, they also mentioned a couple of times, rely on God's will to stay afloat. So that's the spirit that we found among farmers. And when we prompted about specific digital services that could help them improve their climate resilience, only about 45% of farmers pointed to digital advisory and weather forecasts as solutions. And although we know that financial safety nets like insurance can also help, we've seen that they have been less top of mind as ways to improve farmers' climate resilience. So let's now take a closer look at the adoption of these services supported by the Innovation Fund. As you can see on the graph, digital advisory services had the highest adoption rate of all digital agriculture solutions supported during the Innovation Fund, with more than 375,000 farmers accessing some agronomic and climate-related advice from our partners. And this means that close to 1 out of 3 farmers profiled went on to use digital advisory services. Delivering advisory through push SMSs was particularly effective to trigger uptake, since the registration was bundled with digital profiling. It makes things way easier and managed to register more farmers. The success of digital advisory can be because it is a more established service within agricultural value chains, and it is often offered for free to farmers or at very, very low rates. Digital advisory services are also provided on a regular basis throughout the crop cycle, providing more opportunities for farmers to get familiar with it and offering immediate and tangible benefits to farmers. However, you will also see that the services that support farmers' climate resilience, so insurance, climate smart advisory, and hyperlocal weather forecasts, have been slow to take off, and mainly due to low awareness and low willingness to pay among farmers. As for the other services, what we can say quickly is that digital procurement allowed agribusinesses to operate more efficiently and transparently. And while farmers reported preferring the new digital procurement system to the manual sales records, because they find it more quicker and more accurate, but it wasn't enough for them to provide a sufficient reason to sell to a specific agribusiness. Instead, farmers still continued to choose buyers based on convenience or prices. So in the end, out of the 1.4 million farmers profiled, less than 200,000 had sales recorded digitally, which roughly represent 12% of farmers profiled. If we now look at digital payments, now on the previous slide, please, sorry. We see that of the farmers who had their sales digitally recorded, more than 50,000 were paid through a digital channel. Our farmer surveys indicate that digital payments, transaction fee, but also the strong preference for cash and the lack of a digital payment ecosystem within reach of farming communities have undeniably hindered adoption across markets. Finally, about loans, despite the difficulty of forming partnerships with FSPs, which delayed the launch of loan services during the program, we saw a rapid uptake once they were finally put to market, indicating that access to finance constitutes a strong value proposition for smallholder farmers. This was also confirmed, by the way, by our UX research and our monitoring and evaluation surveys, which revealed a strong demand for loan in farming communities. In total, 72,000 farmers took up a loan with one of our grantees. So let's now dig a little deeper into the advisory services offered by our grantees. So as we've just seen, digital advisory services were the most widely adopted services among the portfolio. 5 out of 6 grantees managed to pull off advisory services, although the distribution channel, the distribution model they implemented varied from push SMSs to call centers, apps, and IVR. And supporting diverse types of services like this has allowed us to draw some valuable lessons in terms of what works best to deliver advice to farmers. So for example, we've learned that using push SMSs to deliver advisory content was the most successful model for reaching farmers. Just consider that altogether, providers offering push SMSs captured 86% of digital advisory users in the portfolio. We also found that the reading rate for SMSs was high, but farmers tend to complain if the frequency of these messages becomes too high, leading to lower satisfaction levels that we've seen in our monitoring surveys. So the advice to providers is to regularly review customer satisfaction surveys results and adjust the frequency of the push SMSs messages accordingly or based on the crop calendar. If we look at mobile apps now, of course, the user base is more limited as only smartphone users can access the apps. But despite having smartphones, it's important to remember that app users can still have low digital literacy. And in our surveys, they reported being less likely to notice an app feature, such as the weather forecast function, than with other channels. It's more difficult to browse. And in Indonesia, for example, only 5% of app users we surveyed navigated to the weather forecast page. So that's why training farmers on how to use all these apps and IVR features is critical for boosting usage of these services. Another strategy that was effective in driving farmers' engagement with apps was to leverage push notifications to draw users to new content being added or to promote a feature that usually gets less attention. Cultiva in Indonesia, but also BBK, Jazz Partner in Pakistan, have both seen success with this approach. Overall, regardless of the channel, farmers found that digital advisory improved their access to climate smart and weather information, enabling them to be better prepared for weather events, including extreme heat and drought. However, there are still challenges to overcome. For example, surveys showed that smallholder farmers were unlikely to change their behavior based on digital advisory alone. Rather, they need interactive approaches that leverages, for example, forums, Q&As, and in-person follow-up with field agents to actually implement the advice. Another challenge was the accuracy of climate smart advisory, which needs to be improved in some areas. Some other consideration to increase activity rates of climate smart advisory that apply to all channels was also to share the advice at strategic time during farming cycle. Indeed, we noticed that digital advisory was especially well received during key farming activities. For example, the weeding and planting period was one of the most important times for farmers to receive advice. Finally, advisory content should be adapted to local literacy levels and use common local simple agronomic terminology to ensure that the advice is well understood and will be implemented, as opposed to using scientific terms that we've seen from the surveys were not easily understood by farmers. Great. So now in terms of impact on farmers' livelihoods, digital advisory services were believed to be the most impactful of all services offered within the Innovation Fund that increased both income and climate resilience. Overall, 50% of farmers believe that accessing digital advisory allowed them to increase their income, and 40% of farmers share that they perceive that the climate resilience was improved thanks to digital advisory and weather forecasts. And so what's specifically helping farmers to be more resilient to climate change? So for the most part, it was the ability to protect their crops from weather events, including from extreme heat and from drought. And it was also the ability to anticipate short-term and future weather events. Besides, as I was just sharing, digital advisories also believed to significantly increase income, and that is because of advice on input and fertilizer management that the farmers will receive, or advice on planting and disease control that will allow for greater productivity and yields. And almost 50% of farmers believe that with this increase in income, they will be able to take more appropriate measures against climate change, making them less concerned about climate shocks. So in conclusion, we can say that digital advisory services and weather forecasts show great potential to improve the climate resilience of smallholder farmers, both through direct mitigation and adaptation strategies, but also through improved income, which can be used to invest in better management options. Now, if we're going to focus on the insurance services that were deployed among 4 of the 6 innovation grantees. As we have said in the introduction slides, insurance has been a complex service that was slow to develop and had a rather low uptake. All in all, insurance was piloted with more than 8,700 farmers, and the type of insurance provided varied across markets. While Agromol implemented a loan insurance, Dialogue, Jazz, and Vodacom provided covers for farmers in the form of weather index insurance and area yield index insurance. As you can see on the slide, Jazz, who implemented weather index insurance in Pakistan over 2 pilot cycles, had the highest coverage of all grantees. However, there were no repeat users between the first and the second cycle, which highlights farmers' lukewarm appetite for insurance. Let's try to better understand why uptake lagged behind. So our farmer surveys revealed that insurance was a difficult sell because the value proposition for farmers was uncertain when weighted against the insurance premiums. It's not that farmers don't understand the value of insurance, because they do, especially after experiencing themselves crop losses due to heavy rains, let's say. But the insurance premiums were deemed too high in comparison of the risks. So that's, and there was also a widespread lack of trust in insurance companies, which also contributed to this low adoption. And to try to expand coverage, several grantees decided to fully subsidize the cost of insurance or build it into a bundled product such as inputs. So for example, the cost of insurance policies was borne by Dialogue in Sri Lanka during pilots, and Agromol in Nigeria, in Riep Agro in Pakistan shifted to bundling insurance with in-kind input loans so that it could benefit from a larger adoption. And while these strategies were effective to boost adoption, they resulted in many farmers being unaware that they were insured. So that was a problem. Another important success factor for insurance is the ability to form strong partnerships with insurance companies. And that's because insurance lies outside the core services offering of grantee organizations. So they needed to partner with an insurance provider to offer services suited to smallholder farmers. And in some markets, these insurance providers were scarce, and these have sometimes limited our grantees in finding the right partner to work with. So we've just seen that insurance uptake was greatly limited, and in fact, so is the farmers' perception of its impact on climate resilience. When we've just seen that 40% of farmers believe having access to advisory and weather information improve their climate resilience, only 20% considered that insurance will have a positive contribution to their climate resilience. In other words, farmers were more likely to consider that adapting farming practices and accessing weather forecasts were better climate resilience strategies than accessing financial safety net, such as insurance. Of course, we know that insurance can be a powerful tool as well, because it can help farmers protect their assets and incomes from climate-related shocks and allow them to recover much quicker, basically. But because farmers have low awareness and understanding of insurance as a risk coping mechanism, they don't believe it can have a significant impact on their livelihoods and climate resilience. So there's a clear need for providers to raise awareness of insurance as a tool for absorbing climate shock. Keeping insurance policies simple and better articulating the value proposition around climate resilience will also help in countering low adoption rates that we've seen. Well, thank you for your attention. Jan and I are happy to answer any questions you may have now. And you'll see on the screen, you can download the full reports that were just presented by scanning the QR codes that will link you to our page. You can also just directly go to our page. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa and Jean, for such a wonderful presentation. We have seen great insights regarding, applicability of technology in terms of building the resilience of smallholder farmers. We've seen how CML data can be used to, read rainfall data, especially in the low and middle income countries that are struggling to put up enough weather stations. And we have seen how some use cases of technology in terms of, say, insurance, in terms of, advisory services. Now, we have come to a point where I'm going to open it for questions, and we already have some questions from the audience in the chat that we will try to answer as much as possible. If we are not able to answer all of them, we are still having this conversation through our socials. Find us on LinkedIn as well as Twitter through the hashtags that I mentioned before. So I'm going to start the first question, and this question is going to go to Jan. And I would like you, Jan, to take just a minute to respond to this question. It's coming from about 2 participants here. Shailendra Patel has actually echoed this question, and it's basically about, the cell towers. So from the understanding that we have is that the accuracy and the robustness of the data collected using the CML technology has a very strong dependence on cell tower concentration. So we know that, for example, the report mentions that they need to be at least 10 kilometers apart to get very robust and accurate, data. Now, we know the situation in most low and middle income countries, especially when we talk about rural areas, that cell towers could be very much far apart given that they can even operate at distances of 40 kilometers. So I'm sure the service providers could want to space them out as much as possible to make economic sense. So with that in mind, and now that we are addressing rural smallholder farmers, do we see this technology still remaining robust and, keeping its validity? Is this a limitation to it, or what can you say about it, Jean?
Yeah, thanks a lot for that question. I mean, there's a couple of aspects to the answer there. So first of all, like I presented, mobile networks actually penetrate quite deeply these days into kind of rural areas, and kind of the stats that we have is that around 88% of rural populations are covered by a mobile signal. So this indicates that the towers are there, the links are there, and that's also what we've seen in practice. Now, does that mean that all the rural areas are covered? It doesn't. I mean, every technology has its limitations, and that is definitely one of the limitations from the CML approach. However, I'd like you to just compare it to what is currently available. So we've seen that weather stations have a much less far reach. So they're mainly centered around kind of urban centers, and don't even go into rural areas. And also satellite data is much less high resolution and much less reliable than what CML can provide. And those two sources, weather stations and satellite data, is really what is available right now for weather forecasting and for weather and climate services. So even though CML data is not perfect, it will not cover everywhere and everyone. We believe it provides a much, a step up and a very significant step up in terms of the kind of data that's available for weather and climate services. If that makes sense.
Awesome, that makes a lot of sense. I'd just like to follow this up with a question from Ivan Golovenko, and he asks, can you identify rainfall levels in millimeters using this approach?
Yes, so the algorithms that have been developed by our technical partners do exactly that. So the approach provides kind of what the weather industry calls quantitative precipitation estimates. And that means that they're able to provide kind of for each time step, so every 15 minutes, or if you're collecting data more frequently, even more often, how much rainfall has been estimated to fall during that time step in millimeters. So it's not just kind of an indication whether rain has fallen or not, and some coarse level of rainfall, but it provides that in millimeters, and that's also what's allowed us to compare it to radar sources and weather station sources that provide similar readings. So yes, the short answer is yes.
Thank you so much. It's a very good answer. Lisa, I would like to extend a question to you, and this is coming from also one of our audience, Shailendra Patel, and she's asking how did the GSMA reconcile the need for credit risk assessment, loan repayment, and the understanding that providing access to credit, so in an easy to access, distribute, collect payments to small scale farmers is of critical importance to their ability to become climate resilient and move towards sustainable farming livelihoods. So how did GSMA reconcile this need for credit risk assessment, loan repayments, and the understanding that this provision of access is very critical?
Thank you for the question. I'm going to try to answer, and hopefully I understood it correctly. But it is about loans and loan assessment and repayment mostly. So what I'm going to say about those loans that we supported is that when we did the analysis, at least, we didn't have the full data on loan repayments. But from what we had loan repayments data for 2 of the 4 grantees that implemented loans, and there were quite good repayment rates, actually. And this was because of some of the models that these partners implemented. So for one, it was a loan that was linked to a mobile money account, where the deduction for loan repayment could be made directly from the mobile money account. So that helped having low default rates. And for the other the agri-tech, which was also the crop buyer, implemented a contract farming model. So that means that the farmers actually had a contractual agreement to sell the crop to this buyer, and it was an input loan, so they deducted the input from the harvest that was going to be sold. So we were pretty happy to see that those repayment rates were going, were good. And what was the second part of the question?
No, I think you covered it very well. I'd just like to add one last question, because we actually also running out of time.
I've seen, just if I can, because we haven't talked about loans a lot during this presentation, because we focused on advisory and insurance, but I also saw a question on the chat about what was the reluctance from FSP to engage with our partners. And so the idea originally that we had was that digitized agriculture value chain will create farmer data that could be used for credit and for loan credit scoring assessment. And so we profiled farmers, we collected the farmer information, sales record, etc., digital payments. But when our partner actually discussed with those FSP, they were still requiring farmers to come with the collateral and with extensive documentation, which was actually defeating the purpose of creating those digital identities for farmers. And often when we engaged in the discussion, we realized that they were not, they were saying that their KYC processes and credit scoring processes were still not to a point where they can actually include or integrate those kind of data. So there is kind of there's a need to raise awareness among FSPs about how you can use this data to feed into your credit scoring model, so that we can offer cash loans to farmers. Because what we realize is that then the partners offered some loans, but it was different kind of loans that what we originally had in mind. It was more input loans and mobile money overdraft loans instead of cash loans that could have been of higher amounts. So basically that's what I wanted to mention.
Thank you so much for adding more information on that. So I'm just going to have one more question to you, Lisa. This is coming from Matthew Mims, and he is asking that for telco partnerships to provide these advisory services, is the cost of SMS being included into the feasibility of the service offering? From his experience, it's a lot harder for a third party to offer these services when they have to pay for SMS as a service. What would you say about this?
Yeah, well, thank you for the question again. It's a bit difficult to answer because I feel like all the models were different among all the grantees we supported. So that really depends on the negotiation between the MNO and the advisory partner. And if we take the point of view of an agri-tech, it depends also on what they the negotiation they had. So yeah, some of these services were charging farmers. For example, in Sri Lanka, Dialogue actually went on to debundle the SMS offer and charge it to farmers, and they even realized that the service was going great to a point that they decided to decrease the cost of these SMSs because it was already commercially viable, and that was a good point. Yeah, good thing that was so.
Great. Yeah, I just have one last question to Jan, and this is about the CML technology. As cell technology continues evolving, we are getting into 5G, probably 6G and above. Is it going to work the same way, or is there going to be a difference in applicability of the CML data for rainfall monitoring. Is it going to change? Is it sustainable? What do you think?
That's a great question. Actually, our partners at Delft are starting to look into this, and the interesting developments with 5G are actually that you have many more opportunities to capture data, because 5G enables you to not only look at the signals between cell towers, but also the signals between handsets and cell towers. So actually now every handset that is connected to a tower can also be used as the signal between the tower and the handset can be used as a way of observing rainfall potentially. There's still much more development to be done in that space, but they're very exciting developments that only point to even more potential from this technology.
Maybe one challenge that we'll have to probably discuss later is that this is targeting rural areas, and we know 5G requires very close distances between cell towers, which means even as we transition into 5G and above, we are probably not going to see that a lot of that in the rural areas, or even if we see that, it's going to be in the rural towns, So maybe it's going to be a discussion. We can extend this to LinkedIn and other platforms to just see what is coming ahead, or what are the evolutions that are going to be possible around these technologies. For this session, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank you so much for taking time to participate, to contribute, to ask questions. I have seen a lot of discussions going on chat, and we appreciate that. Let's extend this to social media platforms. And right now, let's start to leave it to Lisa and Jean to give their closing remarks before we end this session.
Thanks so much, Willis. I just like to say thanks again for the opportunity to present our work. I hope we've been able to provide an insightful presentation, sharing kind of the learnings that we've made over the last couple of years working on these topics. We'd urge you to just look at our website. We've got lots of resources there that you can browse through, recordings of webinars and reports. So yeah, please dive in, and also look forward to continuing the discussion on the socials. Thanks so much for the opportunity to join.
Lisa?
Thank you. I think Jens said it all. Looking at the time, I'll just thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you. We welcome you to this webinar series. We will be inviting you for more webinars discussing different themes around climate resilience and climate change in general. We have it every 2 months, and we would like to also get more and more of your insights as we continue, engaging in this dialogue to create more awareness and to, propel action around, building climate resilience of smallholder farmers. You're always welcome. Feel free to engage with us. Feel free to get in touch with us for any reason, for anything you may need. We will try to share the recording of this webinar to the social media platforms. We will also have a full recording on YouTube, where you can access and review some of the content that we have discussed today. Also access this full report through the links that we have provided in the chats. And we hope to see you again. Thank you so much.